Welcome to Design Yatra's third episode on establishing design context. If you see design in the post-independence era, immediately after independence, our designers and architects were trying to come to terms with an Indian identity, designing within an Indian context. But with the onslaught of the globalization and the liberalization of the economy, things started changing very fast. The interior design scene or the context, if you will see, it has changed drastically with the global palette that is available to us in terms of materials, in terms of everything that is concerning the field of design. So what should be the context that we need to look at in times to come is what we're going to discuss. So Amit, we'll begin with you.
So all these years we have been trying to actually understand the necessity, the needs of modern Indian and trying to find the Indian context. And India is a vast country
with
a vast economic strata of people with whom we interact and work, vast social diversity, vast aspirational diversities.
Correct.
I don't think there can be one single Indian identity.
Being contextual is more important rather than having an Indian identity, universal
Absolutely,
Indian
absolutely.
identity.
After independence, the whole aspect of modernity in architecture, I think just like we adopted English, embraced English as a way of unifying the country, I think modernity kind of came to India also as a unifying force. The CPWD, used it as a way of homogenizing its operations throughout the country through its schedule of rates and specifications and so on. But also RCC became a cottage industry. Suddenly people were using it in various villages and small towns. Yes, there was a certain need for modernity. And that kind of changed over time in the 70s and 80s, the need to kind of self-reflect and say that there needs to be an Indian identity. And I think the response to how modernity or modernism modified itself in India is a beautiful story as well. In the 90s, there was this another kind of a thing which happened where there was
out the whole thing.
I don't know. There was facadism. There were architects who were brought in just to design facades.
Yes.
And I think that kind of concern is even more magnified now today. What is the presentation of a certain building? And I think that's something that is a cause for concern.
How do we view the discussion that we're having to have a context, like Amit was talking of, should there be an Indian identity? Because it's so contextual, like he said. And you're talking of the explosion that has happened in terms of superficiality in design. Sanjay, meanwhile, why do you think this is important, or is it important? And what are your views on this?
Certainly is important. I mean, given the diversity of the country, I think it's also kind of changing so rapidly that we need to kind of develop our own solutions to the whole thing. So I guess context is very important. I would also not blindly ape the West.
Mm-hmm.
It's important that we find our own solutions to these problems. But I would not say that there is like one unique kind of identity to India.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, though it's been typed that way after the modern movement.
Mm-hmm. So tell us one thing. While growing up, you would have gone through this experience of, the struggle to adopt modernism and then to veer away towards the Indian context. What was your experience about it? I mean,
I think we still stuck to modernism as a broad term. But within that, I think one was trying to find solutions which were unique to each place, or whether it was relying on local material, be it brick or stone, or even looking at concrete, because it was labor intensive. Therefore, that became a automatic solution rather than steel. And that brought its own kind of challenges, but I think also a uniqueness because of that.
Oh, because of that, yeah. Jabin, the fact that the IIID has taken this as a topic of discussion, I assume that you as the institute are concerned about this topic and the need to be contextual. And how has Design Yatra is going to achieve this, and how do you think are you taking this to masses, making them sensitive to this?
The meaning of the word context, if you look at it, it's like a setting which will help us understand an event or a statement. So, a setting is necessary for understanding our designs, and if that setting is not there, probably we will not understand it completely. And if we don't understand something, it means it doesn't make sense, and what doesn't make sense is nonsense. So, we are now actually talking about sensible design and actually designs which doesn't make that kind of a sense. So, here again we interacted with designers as well as people. There are people who are very, very influenced by the imagery or images which they see in magazines, or the glimpses when they get when they travel world over without understanding what it is. They are just impressed by it. There is an extent to which probably a designer can tell the people about a context, and probably they are not listening also. So, that is why this Design Yatra is to completely try and sensitize the public, as well as try and help the designers solve this kind of a problem there.
How do you place all this with newer typologies of buildings that are coming up, newer design paradigms that are evolving by the day?
The word context, just taking on what she was mentioning, I think it's important that we understand it in our own context in context. And I think that the whole idea of engaging with context is important. In terms of buildings where there is no context in traditional Indian architecture, like an airport or a mall, define context for yourself, essential or archetypal.
The archetypal images that you're talking of, so we mean to say that a designer should make his own context or define his own context.
I think so. Post 60s, 70s, there was this whole period of symbolism, which was symbolism became a protagonist in architecture. I think that symbolism is kind of empty. It's you can put in jharokas and domes and so on onto a building, but it doesn't have meaning really. And to force context into a building is, I feel, meaningless.
This brings to a very very valid point that we're discussing.
I would like to disagree completely with what Amit is saying.
Very nice.
That when you look at the past, there are only overpowering buildings as from a ruler or space. But I think India had rich regional contexts in which people, common man, existed in beautiful houses. Now, it's not that we want to build our houses for ourselves, it's that we want to build a house to show somebody something we are not even.
That's the paradigm shift that we're talking of in society. Now people are empowered, and the democratic nature of practice.
Yes,
of design.
therefore this critical time when we have to sensitize people how that empowering shouldn't go against a contextual design vocabulary which this country is in need of.
For me, again, when we talk of context, the most important thing is to reaction to climate, which is unfortunately I find missing in most of the modern. And when you talk of, are the masses aware of it? I actually question, are the designers even aware of it?
That's a fundamental thing that you raised, which I was.
Because architects in metro cities are responding to the market. In some ways, aspirational is the word, that you want to impress somebody, you want to, and it's never your own. It's always for something else.
The second part I would say contextual is your local available materials and I mean, again, I'm not against technology. I love technology, and technology is the way forward. Modern materials are the way forward, but how they are used. I mean, glass is a beautiful material, but to put it on west side of a building,
Unless the end user, the common people that we're talking of, is sensitized, number one. Number two, the design fraternity themselves get sensitized to this aspect. Things are not going to change.
It's also boiling down to education. So it's how they are kind of being imparted any kind of knowledge.
IIID also recognizes the importance of tying up with students and educational institutions, And therefore, wherever this design yatra is going to go, we have made it part of our common minimum program that the yatra, the nano cars are taken to colleges. There should be interaction between the designers and the students on design context, how we respond to the climate, how we respond to local materials, how we, try to create an Indianness without being rigidly Indian, how we evolve,
So I think we had a very nice interaction of thoughts, and I'm sure the design yatra will get benefited out of this discussion, and the roadmap ahead probably will be defined by whatever we've discussed. Thank you so much.